Beyond Economics and Back podcast is created by Lithuanian Free Market Institute.
Welcome to the Lithuanian Free Market Institute podcast. My name is Augminas Petronis, and today my guest is Robert Wright, who is a historian of economics. He's an author of numerous books and articles, including a book that I have here that's on universal basic income, which is our topic today. Robert Wright also has taught at Augustana University, New York University Stern School of Business, Temple University, University of Virginia, and elsewhere. He's currently lecturing at the Central Michigan University, and he was formerly a senior research faculty at the American Institute for Economic Research. And as I've already mentioned, today we're going to speak about universal basic income, which is an idea that everyone in the society should get regular cash payments from the government. And this idea has received some, let's say, significant popularity we can probably say the last decade. So, Mr. Wright, thank you for coming to our podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here.
And yes, so I've already mentioned the book that you have written together with Alexandra Przegalinska. It's a book on universal basic income. It's called Debating Universal Basic Income Pros, Cons, and Alternatives. Here I have it in my hand. And as the name suggests, you're sort of trying to give a balanced view to the UBI. So how did you get into the topic? Did you find the UBI to be interesting in some ways?
Well, as an economic historian, I'm very interested in the evolution of economies over time and trying to answer the question of why are some countries so rich? Why do they have such high per capita income? Why do they produce so many goods every year, and why are some so dreadfully poor? And during part of my journey to understand, to be able to sketch out the answer to that very important question, I started to look at income distributions within countries, particularly the United States, but others as well, and how they income distribution evolved over time within those societies. And so UBI comes up quite frequently, actually, or UBI like proposals, most notably a fellow named Thomas Paine, who was born in Britain and spent a lot of his life in France, but also spent part of his life in the British North American colonies that became the United States of America. And he actually wrote a famous, least famous here, pamphlet called Common Sense, where he took many Americans over the line from staying loyal to the king and the mother country and pushing them into revolution. So he continued to write and had some very interesting things to say about topics like banking in the United States. And I was asked by the American Institute for Economic Research to compile his most important writings. And in one of those writings, he espouses what we would call today a UBI, a universal basic income. There had been previous thinkers who had kind of been in and around the idea, but Paine is often credited as the first one in English anyway to really nail it and to say everyone should get it. It shouldn't be a lot of money, but it should be sufficient. That's the basic idea, and that it should be an income, at least for people who are superannuated, who are too old to work anymore. and he proposed a universal basic asset for everyone as they came of age, as they became economically mature and moved out of their parents' household. So it was quite an interesting proposal, and of course, he wrote it late in the 18th century, and it went absolutely nowhere. But that was what started my looking into this idea.
Yeah, I wanted just to make a joke. What age did he give for people who would normally leave their parents' house? Was it like
Uh,
18,
well, yeah, I believe it was 21.
21? Okay.
Yeah, and that's because it matched the legal age for
Yes.
unmarried persons. Obviously, people got married at much younger ages back then, so they would become legally emancipated upon their marriage if they were married before age 21. Um, but he's also thinking very much in a British context, and the British at that time were getting married later than they were in America, because America was growing very very rapidly. So you had a 15, 16-year-old daughter, um, you married her off in America because we needed people. And yeah, I mean, I've seen references to quote unquote old maids who were 19 years old in the U.S. So, but in Britain, where the economy was a little bit more stagnant, you had people getting married in their 20s quite regularly. So, um, but a lot of times UBI advocates, they don't dwell on such details. It's we call it hand waving. It's like, yeah, whatever. We'll figure out the age. That's not the point here. The point
Yeah.
here is we want to transfer resources from one group and give it
Mhm.
to quote unquote everyone.
Yes, but it was probably not because you were so much interested in the thought of Thomas Paine that you decided to write. Well, you made the decision to co-author the book on universal basic income, right?
Oh well,
This was
yeah.
even.
So I was working at AIER at the time, and Alexandra, whose last name you pronounce beautifully, by the way. I cannot, I cannot
I did
get.
some practice. I did some practice. Yes.
Yeah, I can't get close to that with my very American tongue. But uh, Alexandra came to AIER several times to do research, and she's very interested in the topic. She is a specialist in um, artificial intelligence, and her concern is that artificial intelligence could make people economically obsolete. And that's one of the reasons why today, after this couple of century journey, AI has become popular. Yeah, AI, UBI has become popular once again, because people are afraid that AI is going to take all of the jobs, so to speak. And then what will people do? So we started talking about that and decided to write an article about it that was eventually published. And our point was, looking at economic history, there are basically five ways that people have earned a living in the past. And one way is through employment, of course. Another way is through proprietorship, where they own their own business, like a farmer or a shopkeeper or what have you. Another way is through portfolio investment, where you invest in a corporation, say, and their stocks and then their bonds, and you get an income that way. Another way is through subsistence activities, and that's what Paine really hit upon. Um, was the notion that the world used to be a commons and anyone could go and take resources off the commons. But with the privatization of property, that wasn't possible anymore. So people had to be compensated for that loss. And then the fifth and final way are transfers, unilateral transfers from charities and increasingly, of course, from governments. So UBI falls into that last category and was being invoked to try to cover something that hasn't even happened yet, which is AI taking all of the employment. And our point was, well, there's still these three other ways of making a living, of earning income. One is to own your own business, where you could employ an AI if appropriate. Another is to invest assets in corporations, like maybe ones that are getting rich because of AI. And subsistence activities, Paine was picturing, again, Great Britain in the 18th century, where a lot of the commons had been enclosed and the rest of the lands were the kings owned, and you could be executed just for going and taking sticks off from the king's land, to burn to keep your family warm, so sort of thing. But that's not the case anymore, and it's not the case in the United States, that has vast public land ownings and that has very sophisticated systems for rationing natural resources, hunting and fishing and gathering resources. So it is possible in many parts of the U.S. to subsist, to get the food and the minerals that your body needs by procuring them yourself. So yeah, we were just pointing out that these alternatives exist. And by the way, AI hasn't taken any jobs yet. And if you look at economic history, it's not very likely to take jobs. And so I started looking at earlier waves of mechanization and automation, and the story's the same. You probably know the stories of the Luddites who were like, oh no, there are machines that are making cloth now, and so we got to break those machines. They're gonna take all our jobs. When in fact they didn't take all the jobs. They just made us more productive. They just made us wealthier. And I trace this all the way even into the 1950s and 1960s, is where it was called cybernetics back then. There was a fear that these computers were going to take over all the jobs back then in the 50s and 60s. And of course, we got nowhere near that. What we see is an evolution of the structure of jobs, right? Of the structure of employment. Certainly the same jobs do not exist today that existed back then, or vice versa. Right? The structure of what corporations need to be done changes, and so job descriptions and job titles and whatnot changes over time. But we've yet to lose employment. You can look at data for non-farm payrolls in the United States, and it just goes, with two exceptions: the Great Depression, which was caused by the government. I just finished a book about the causes of the Great Depression.
I think you will have to say a couple of sentences about it, because I think many of our listeners would find that surprising, don't you think?
What, that the government caused the Great Depression?
Yeah, exactly that.
Well, I can't speak for Eastern Europe. And of course, the Soviet Union was constantly in a depression. Well, in the U.S. context specifically, a recession started before the stock market crash. Right, so the output was already trending downward. Then the stock market crashes, and the government responded with policies that hurt the the economy even more. One of those policies was called the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which put tariffs of 50 to 60% on a lot of goods, and many countries throughout the world saw it for what it was. We even called it in the public prints here a beggar thy neighbor policy. And they said, oh, we're not going to allow this. So they put retaliatory tariffs on. So they started putting taxes on U.S. goods, just like we put tariffs on goods coming into the United States. So you see international trade plummeting. Another thing was, and this started even under Herbert Hoover, was high wage policies. And he did mostly what was called jawboning. That's where he doesn't come up with anything. It's not a law. It's just a presidential attitude, a threat, basically. You had better raise your wages, he said to the captains of industry, or you're going to pay. I'm going to sick the power of the federal government on you. And at the time, the federal government was less powerful than it is today. That's for sure. But it still had and had for 40 years antitrust legislation, what do they call it in Europe? Competition policy, right? So the government could force big companies to break themselves up. And they could tie them down in very expensive litigation for a long time, even if they didn't win. And so industry took this as a threat, and they did not lower wages during the Great Depression. And because of what was going on in the money supply, which was also a government problem, there was significant deflation. Mm-hmm. So not the price level going up like it does today so often, but the price level going down and quite steeply. And this is because the government mismanaged the money supply. It didn't understand that effectively the world was no longer on a gold standard, because under a gold standard, gold will automatically flow to where it's most valuable. So governments didn't have to do anything for millennia. Gold would just flow in, gold would flow out, with no one planning it. But by the 1920s, because most of the world's biggest economies went off from the gold standard during the Great War and never really fully got back on it, and also due to the creation of the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, we didn't have a central bank for almost a century. And we talked ourselves into a central bank on the notion that it would not that it would control the money supply, but on the notion that it would be a lender of last resort. So if banks got into trouble, that it would create fiat money to keep them afloat until better economic times came. Well, in the Great Depression, there were waves of bank bankruptcies. There are famous movie scenes about this. I don't know if people have seen movies like It's a Wonderful Life, but it hinges on bank run scenes. And one of my articles, I get into details about it. But so there were these banks, and the Federal Reserve just stood by and watched them fail. And that caused the money supply to go down, which put further downward pressure on prices. So the Great Depression was in the United States was very much caused and exacerbated by the government. Mm-hmm. And then of course FDR comes in with the New Deal and does a bunch of other policies that hurt the economy further, and that's why we really didn't get out of it until that short guy from that country west of you there, started causing trouble. The one with the little mustache right there. Yeah.
Yes. I think
so.
our listeners will know what you're talking about. I'm really glad that we got into this automation issue because I think it's really the big issue that sits next to the UBI question. Because it seems that if robots and AI start really replacing people at a speed that people cannot catch up with, then apart from the UBI, we seem to have very, very little answer to this. Don't you think so? Like,
Well, no, I mean, I like my article with Alexandra said, we have to get out of this mindset that employment is the key to a good economic life. It's
mhm,
only in the 20th century that that's the case. Before that, it was proprietorship. In fact, in the United States, to be an employee was considered almost slavery. It was something that you did as a last resort when your farm went bust or you couldn't, you couldn't make enough money doing retail or what have you. The goal was to own your own business and to run it and to, create a competency that way. Uh, the and then as proprietorship started to fade because of things like economies of scale, where there were certain activities that just didn't pay anymore unless you did them in these massive factories, like shoe production, for example. It used to be that an individual called a cobbler would have his own little business,
mhm.
putting shoes together for people. Um, but then factories started putting them out and standardizing sizes and ran most of the cobblers out of business, right? So uh, what many people started to do was to buy the securities of the big firms, their stocks and their bonds, right? So you lost out in direct competition, but you gained because you owned a piece of your competitor. Yeah.
Mm.
So people today should be buying, if they really think that this is a threat, they should be buying the shares in the corporations that are producing the
The threat.
AIs,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And then again, there's these subsistence activities, which sounds horribly, like 19th century sort of thing. But many people enjoy it, and the technology that we have today makes it easier in many ways, and we pay good money now for products that get labeled here organic, meaning that they were grown in a certain way without using fertilizers or GMOs or what have you. Uh, well, if you don't have uh, a job that forces you to be in some office or on Zoom or whatever from 9 to 5 every day, you have time to plant your own garden and to make it a very good garden. Uh, and even in urban areas, they people garden on like old lots that nobody wanted to purchase. Sometimes a civic organization or the local municipal government will buy the lot, and they will say to people, "This is gardening space for you now." And then they work out how to ration the space that's available. But not all farming or gardening these days is horizontal on the ground. A lot of it is vertical, where you can grow plants directly from vertical structures, and feed them in very efficient ways, water and the nutrients that they need to grow, and then you know exactly where your food came from. Uh, it's quite organic. Um, yeah.
So yeah, so like, are you suggesting that we maybe, so if let's say robots and AI, they start doing more and more of those things that people who are employed are doing now, Do you think that we may be going in the direction of a society that's in a way more similar to society that we had before everybody was employed? Is that what
Yes, yes, absolutely. And there will be some winners from that, some really big winners. I imagine that soon, you'll start to see a premium on things that are human produced. Just like for a long time, we've had premiums on things like furniture that's handcrafted, right? Because people recognize that there's a quality there that is missing from standardized machine made. Yeah, and also it's the quality in the craftsmanship, but also a quality in the materials that go in. And so I can imagine seeing the same thing evolving in a service space, right? Where yeah, you can use the AI to get consulting work done, but that it's just a cookie cutter sort of thing, and it's not really customized to you. So you'll pay a premium to get an
yeah,
actual human being to do the work, right? And that won't be maybe as many jobs, but the top levels will still
yeah,
be working, right?
yeah,
Plus, again, to go back, we got sidetracked by the Great Depression, but if you look at the number of non-farm payroll jobs in the United States since the beginning of the 20th century, it's gone like this, and then the Great Depression, and then up again until we hit um, the great lockdowns of 2020, where it dips again, and now it's back in the process of returning to the trend line. So, haven't seen any indication that AI is taking anyone's job. Well, because most people don't think about where the money comes from. And of course, ultimately, almost all government revenue comes from taxpayers. So
right.
they're going to be getting a check every month, but they're also going to have to pay higher taxes. And a certain portion of the population will get a net UBI. But another significant portion of the population will just be paying on net, right?
Right,
The
right.
only way that scenario doesn't work out is
Yeah,
if there is something that I call mana, as in mana from heaven,
yes.
something free coming, which I mean, it's no wonder that the one state in the U.S. that has a UBI is energy rich and not very highly populated. That's the one that we bought from Russia back in the
Yes,
1860s. It's
yes,
called
yes.
Alaska.
Yes.
Uh,
And the UBI is not very high there. It's like $2,000 a year. So that's not like very much money. It's just
that especially there because the price level is so high up there. Um,
right.
yeah, it's not a lot of money. Another one, uh, a whole country that has a UBI and has for some time, that's also oil rich is Iran.
Mhm.
And because of inflation, it's
Yeah.
eroded in real value over time. But it's like Social Security in the United States. You can't get rid of it. It just sits there, and the Iranian government, pays it out. But and in both of these cases, it was basically the notion of, well, there was this commons of oil, and now
Mhm.
we're sharing the profits from exploiting that
Right.
resource, that commons with
Right.
everyone. But yeah,
Well,
it's not a lot of money. The math very quickly would turn into you're taxing some people to pay other people.
I mean,
If it,
people on the left would probably say that it's a good thing. If we give everybody a UBI and we tax the rich, like let's eat the rich, and so sort of.
yeah, well, the thing is, we won't have many rich people. We won't have, and there's a misapprehension that probably goes back, to early human history,
Mm.
when we didn't have significant economic growth. That if someone had more than someone else, they must have stolen it, right? So we have that sort of ingrained. So we all get this not just jealousy, but a hatred of the ultra rich, because we think, well, they must have stolen it from other people. But we're educated enough now, and we know that economies in rich countries anyway grow. That actually they just took a very small portion of the growth that they helped to create. So, uh, yeah, I think the socialists really need to update their thinking and get out of caveman times and move up to the present, and understand the reality of the situation is if they raise taxes too high, then people aren't going to have incentives to work harder, smarter, longer, faster, and we'll end up with something like the Soviet Union, with just this dreadful system of I get to tell you what to do because I'm the boss, and
Yes,
uh, yeah, what was the old saying? The workers pretend to work and the government pretends to pay them.
yes, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly that. And yes, but I mean, there are also some libertarian leaning people who support the universal basic income, and they think that the UBI could be like a better way of managing the welfare system, let's say. So the current systems are inefficient, they are expensive, they're complicated to manage. Something the help from the governments arrive too late. And people who need it the most, they have to go through all kinds of bureaucracy in order to get it. And the UPI would be simple. You just write everyone a check. Governments are good at writing checks to people anyway. You don't have to find out who's qualified to get it because everybody is qualified, and yeah, it's simple, it's cheap to manage, because many things that and because of that, many things in many Western countries are currently done by the governments, like healthcare or education. They could be done by private enterprises. They would be cheaper and better than now. And as much as I understand, you yourself are libertarian leaning. And do you find this persuasive? And what would you say to like other libertarian leaning people, let's say, who are supportive of the UBI?
yeah. Study a branch of economics called public choice.
Mm.
This is a branch of economics that sort of stepped into a void because political scientists, for whatever reason, were very reluctant to criticize the government. And every single story that they told and that historians told was one of public interest, that policy X was implemented in order to help everyone. But when you start to delve into the details of why certain policies were implemented, you turn out that it was not to help everyone. That
That
in fact,
everyone is not actually everyone.
everyone's not actually. Yes. What was the line from Animal Farm? Some pigs are more equal than other pigs, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns out that not everyone is helped, and oftentimes the groups that's the policy was implemented ostensibly to help were the ones who are most hurt by the policies, and that often the policies help a very small percentage of the population. And this is the thing that I would like to tax, actually. If you want to fund a UBI from Mana, don't tax all of the rich, because many of them became rich because they provided goods at a price that people wanted to to pay for those goods. Yeah. But there's another segment of the rich, or probably some segment of all the rich, but and there's a segment of the rich where the bulk or all of their wealth comes from this activity that economists call rent seeking. It's when you get something for nothing. It's where you get the government to pass legislation that aids you and a few others while hurting everyone else. I would love to tax that at 100%, and that could be used to fund a UBI. But if you look at the UBI literature coming out of the left, as I had to do in the book Debating UBI that I wrote with Alexandra, you see that the left is already saying, yeah, we need UBI not to replace current programs, but in addition to. And that's where I have a sense that the libertarians who think that UBI will replace existing programs need to look much harder at the history of public policies.
Right.
There would have to be some sort of grand bargain made where maybe just in one piece of legislation, UBI was created and all of the existing programs done away with at the same time. You couldn't trust it. You couldn't trust the politicians to pass a UBI and then to get rid of the other stuff. It would have to be done in one fell swoop. And I think in the US context, to get that to work politically, there would also have to be a constitutional amendment that would say that the government is allowed to redistribute resources via a UBI and in no other way.
Yeah.
We'd have to put it right in the Constitution.
I think where you're touching on is that it's very often said that UBI cuts across political divisions and different political, let's say, ideologies or opinions, but that's not true because those different people from those different camps, they tend to see UBI in a very different light. Like for libertarians, it's a more efficient way of managing the welfare. And then for people who are more on the left, it's like all this post-work movement, and then UBI is just one part in a larger proposal, which includes like 15 hours work week and then free healthcare for everyone and free everything for everyone. And yeah, so you see my point. It's not like, it in some way cuts across political divisions, but then people have very, very different ways of imagining what it's for and what it should do. Because I touched upon this. Maybe what's your opinion on this so-called post-work movement? Like people like Rutger Bregman, David Graeber, who argue that it probably goes back to what we talked about, the automation, but that we will soon have, almost inevitably, we will have 15 hours work week, the UBI, abundant social guarantees. And all we have to do is just to push the political elites a little to tax the rich and then distribute to everyone. And what's your opinion in general? Like you had to come across these things when you were writing about
yeah, sure. Like what was the one Bastani, I want to say, of fully automated luxury communism.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll sort of believe it when I see it. I do think that eventually we will only work 15 hours a week or what have you. But that's just the trend, right? Mm-hmm. So 100 years ago, the average work week in the United States was like 70 hours a week. And now it's only like, investment bankers and lawyers who work that long. And that's because they make very, very high wages and very competitive industries for doing that. But the official work week of the common man, the common laborer is 40 is
Yeah.
still what we default to, but in fact, with lunch breaks and other breaks, it's more in the
Mhm.
35 range, and uh,
Yes.
it's come to, yeah, it's come down. You can see it even in pop culture, like in the 1950s, I think it was. There was a song about a guy who couldn't find himself a girlfriend in a particular town where he was living and working. And he, the line in the song goes, "It's Saturday night and I ain't got no body. I
Mhm.
got some money because I just got paid." And then he goes on to describe, the troubles in his love life and whatnot. But
Mhm.
he's saying that he got paid on Saturday. So sometimes when I present this to like an economic history class, they'll be like, "Why would an employer, you know, after I explained to them that the payment was probably in cash in an envelope, which even I received at my first jobs, right? Why would
Mhm.
an employer make an employee go all the way back into work on a Saturday to get paid?" And we walk through it, and then eventually a light bulb will go off, and they'll say, "Oh, he was working on Saturday."
Right.
Yes, because we used to work 6 days a week. That's how that's one way to get all the, those hours to pan out, because there's only so many hours in a day, right? Um, and then we moved from working full days on Saturdays to working half days on Saturdays. And then we moved to, Saturday work being unusual. And now we seem to have moved to where Friday work is unusual. And there are many
Mhm.
universities here in the US, including mine currently, where Fridays are for meetings, they're for clubs. Classes are just Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday. So basically on a 4-day week. So I have no doubt that that trend will continue as we get more and more productive. I just don't see it going, we're trending downward. I just don't see it going like that,
Yeah.
because economic change comes quite slowly. We might have artificial intelligence, but the ability to use those tools will not develop overnight. I have experience in this. I was helping to train a next gen AI.
Mhm.
And I stopped doing it when I realized that the AI was actually training me. I
Wow.
was not training it. It was training me in the proper prompts to feed it in order to get it to spit out what I wanted.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like a magical box where these things are just doing things. Also, and I know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this
Going
this
back
can
to,
change, but I fed it my exams, and it completely bombed it.
yeah,
And
completely
another,
bonded to mean it did perform well. Sorry for my English.
it failed. Yeah, it failed.
Failed.
Yes,
Oh,
and
I
that's
see.
because my questions on my are not multiple choice. It can do very well at multiple choice factual sorts of stuff.
Mm.
My exams test for understanding. So I will give students, they're not even questions, they're called prompts. So I'll give them up to three different sources of data or articles, and they need to read it and recognize what the author is talking about, and
Right.
then respond in that way. So it requires something beyond just memorizing stuff and spitting it back out. The AIs clearly can do that at this point, but they don't truly understand what they're talking about.
Yes, they
So
just imitate. I mean, the AI just imitates the speech.
yeah,
They
are
don't
you
really
familiar with
understand
the
anything. I think
are
the
you familiar
listeners
with the
here.
Mechanical Turk?
Sorry.
Are you familiar with the Mechanical Turk?
No, I'm not, and I think some of our listeners won't be either. So you can tell about it.
18th century somebody developed a automated chess player.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a chessboard, and then it was a felt, and he was dressed in like a turban and whatnot. So that's where the Turk comes from. It was
Okay.
somebody from what we call Turkey today.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and this thing would play chess, and it would often beat human opponents, but not always.
Okay.
And everyone was amazed that that there could be this mechanical contraption that would beat people at chess, which is not the most sophisticated game in the world, but is certainly much more sophisticated than like checkers or what have you, right?
That's true.
So yeah, so this thing would go to like circuses and whatnot, and people would pay money to play against the mechanical Turk, and then they could tell their friends, oh yeah, I lost to it, but it was close or whatever. This thing goes on for about 100 years, going from country to country and making headlines and all of this. And then it's finally revealed that it was a human being inside of this
Of the
contraption
machine.
who could see the chessboard and was working levers in order to get the mechanical Turk to pick up pieces and move it. So
Wow.
AI is still kind of at that point where most people don't realize that what's really behind the AIs are human beings
To teach the robots.
who who teach it and who are trained on various parts of the knowledge that humans have created over the centuries, right? That's all that it does at this point. It's not thinking independently yet.
Yeah.
It'll look like it though, and unless you know that there's actually people inside of this contraption, you'll be quite amazed by it. But um, it does not have that spark of insight, much less divinity in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to tell this joke. I think it was one Lithuanian guy who works in advertising who said that the AI will never take. So he does like graphic design, like pictures. And he said that the AI will never take his job away from him because the clients won't be able to explain to AI what exactly they want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So
because it's much harder to it's very hard to know what exactly you want. It's much harder to explain. Yeah, but then I think our podcast is probably going to towards the end. Now, for the last question, just for something serious and interesting to think about, going to the history of economics, it seems that there is sort of overall tendency that the governments they tend to regulate more and more things, to do more and more redistribution and new things that were previously unregulated. They get regulated, and if something gets regulated, it is just more likely that one regulation will be replaced by another regulation, but not that things would be just left without any regulation or with some sort of very mild regulation. And yeah, you seem to agree with that. Um, if that is so, does it not show that we're heading maybe already inevitably to some sort of like state socialism in the West, including the UBI, which could have some bad consequences, of course, for our societies. But it's sort of we are already on the turn where it's very hard to change the direction of our movement.
uh, yeah, I mean, I tend to be what's called black pilled. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I tend to be pessimistic like that. But we can look at history, and there are a few times where the regulatory regime has become so onerous that the system has collapsed of its own weight, like the Soviet Union, right?
Right.
It collapsed, and it's unfortunate what came out of that. What I hope to be able to do is that when our current system collapses of its own weight, that instead of turning towards uh, oligarchs and whatnot, that we will turn towards economic freedom,
Mm.
because it's very well established that more economic freedom means more prosperity. And essentially, there is no one in the United States who is poor in any meaningful sense of the term. There are people who have gotten into life situations and they've gotten mostly hooked on harder drugs, who
Right.
live in tents and beg and whatnot. But uh, that's what I would like to do, is to focus on the causes of poverty for individuals and to discover the barriers that prevent them from living a normal existence in the US, which is wonderful, right? We have these boxes where you take food and you stick it in, and the food stays cold.
Right.
If it's too hot outside, we have air conditioning. If it's too cold outside, we have heat. Um, we have dry conditions. I mean, these are things that the richest, if you hurt yourself, you put a little ointment on it and you're fine. These are things that 120 years ago would have killed the richest man in the world, right? We've all this wonderful technology at our disposal, and it's very convenient and inexpensive. So in that sense, we're all rich. Uh, but I'd like to identify in individuals what caused them to be living in a tent and begging and all of that sort of stuff. And I have a very strong notion that the vast majority of them, if you really dug into it, were all hurt by government regulations of one form or another. They received very poor public schooling
Mm.
that left them unable to obtain a job. They were prevented from getting a low skilled job by minimum wage. They tried to set up their own business to be a proprietor, like we talked about, but there was an occupational licensing restriction that prevented them from doing that. So I think at the root of all of the what do they call them now? The unhoused, which
Yeah.
are ostensibly the poorest of folks, there is a government regulation at the root of it. So
Right.
I would like to expose that and get those regulations eliminated in the name uh, of helping the poor. And let's try that before we do any massive social experiments where we're redistributing trillions of dollars each year. I think that there is a natural UBI in a growing economy, and that is just going out and doing some work, which
Yeah.
will be available if the government doesn't have policies in place that prevent individuals from succeeding to the point that they are physically capable and mentally capable of doing it.
All right. So I think probably that's it for today. So thank you very much again. This has been Robert Wright at the Lithuanian Free Market Institute podcast. For more discussions on the UBI, you can check our channel. Currently, most of the videos there are in Lithuanian, but we are working on providing some content in English as well. And yeah, so thank you again.
Thank
And
you very much. It was great.
yeah, goodbye.
Bye.